Part 1. Muhammad and the Mountain. Welcome! Welcome. Settle in, have a snack, have a good time. The first thing that we have to do is we have to disambiguate this question. If you're the kind of nerd that I am, which is annoying, you could say that what we have to do is we have to agree on our beliefs about what the sentence "animals have beliefs" means. And there are two ways to go about that. The first, and the lazy one, is just to define our way out of this problem. I could jot down some definitions for animal belief, and if you agreed with those definitions, we could just move forward. And the second, and I think the better way, and so we're going to go with that one, is that I could use the definition of animal belief that is already in your head. Your current conceptualization might be a little bit half-baked if you haven't thought about this before, but you do have one. That claim is called the theory, by the way. More on that later. But so the second approach has a couple of advantages. For one, if we use your definition, then you get to do a little bit less work, which is nice. For one of us. And for two, my claim here is that the statement, "animals have beliefs," is true from the perspective of the lay person. So if I came up with my own definitions, this video would be relevant to absolutely no one. So then we're going to go with the layperson's idea of what a belief is. And that turns out to be a whole area of research called folk psychology. The central claim of folk psychology is that you, in your everyday interactions with other people, use a theory of mind. Though I should note that the claim that you use a theory of mind is itself a theory, and it's called the theory, because they thought that's cute. And we're just gonna accept the theory as true, because in my honest opinion, it is. But so a theory of mind has to specify some mental constructs and how those constructs interact. It's exactly what it sounds like. It's a theory about how the mind works. If you have a good theory of mind, then you'll be able to explain, as well as predict, other people's behavior. And you'll also be able to better explain and understand your own behavior. This is already pretty profound if you observe that your theory of mind is shaped by the society that you inhabit. Yes, we live in a society. So for example, the vibe in the West is to view sexual release as more of a need than a desire. And that perspective is then sometimes used as an explanation and even a justification of sexual assault. And this is, of course, another manifestation of the patriarchy, right?
Rape culture is part of patriarchy.
But so folk psychology is what we're going to use. So let's take a closer look at it. Part 1.2. Folk psychology theory of mind. The simplest theory of mind in folk psychology has just two concepts: belief and desire. Belief captures how you think the world works, and desire captures what you want the world to look like. If you know how the world works, and you know what you want it to look like, then you can take actions to get to that state, and you've just derived the origin of behavior. So now let's take a look at the mental constructs and how they interact. Desire is about what you would expect it to be. You don't have something, and then you want it. Desires are usually the results of deprivations. So for example, vegans and their nutritional yeast. Desires also depend on beliefs, because in some sense, in order to desire something, you have to believe that that something will satisfy that desire. I'm sure saying the word desire a lot. Desires are also composable with beliefs. So if you want drugs, and you believe that the drugs are locked away, then you will desire to open the lock. So now let's change gears and talk about beliefs. Here are 3 characteristics of beliefs that should reflect your current beliefs about beliefs. This is fun, right? The first characteristic is that beliefs should be separated from or decoupled from direct observations. If you can only have beliefs about stuff that is in front of you, then you have perception, not belief. This is called decoupling, as in you are decoupling direct observation from mental belief. The second characteristic is that a belief must be composable with other beliefs. So let's suppose that you believe that a sandwich is high in calories. Then you may also believe that the sandwich is good for you if you believe that you are underweight. Or you might believe that it's bad for you if you believe that you are overweight. The point is that you ought to be able to compose beliefs, because if you can't, what you really have is a hardwired reflex as opposed to a belief. And the third characteristic of beliefs is that they should change in light of new evidence. So if you believe it's sunny outside and you walk out and it's actually cloudy, then you can't maintain your sunny belief. It isn't always sunny. My hope here is that you find those characteristics to be reasonable, and that they conform pretty closely to what you already believe about beliefs. I'm not saying you're basic. I'm just saying that, according to folk psychology, that is how most people conceptualize belief. And now we're going to use that specification of belief to think about animal belief. Part 2. Bayes' rules. Even though it does make me sound a little bit like a Reddit moderator, I do try to avoid having beliefs that I can't derive from first principles. What I cannot create, I do not understand. The reason I'm mentioning this here is that I cut a whole section that derived Bayes' rule from scratch, and the reason I cut that section is that I thought that was long, and I thought that it was boring, and there aren't a lot of people out there that are like in love with statistics. But if in general that is the kind of detail that you would like to see, then leave a comment saying how you would like the video to be longer and more boring and to have more statistics in it, and I'll hook you up. But so I'm not going to derive Bayes' rule from scratch, and instead I'll just show it to you. You got two events, A and B, and the probability of some event A, given that some event B has happened, is equal to the probability of B happening, given A has happened, times the probability of event A happening, divided by the probability of event B happening. That equation right there is how you update your beliefs in light of new evidence, and you should be using it all over your life. If you're talking about some serious issue, and someone sends you a piece of evidence, whether it's an article or a study or whatever, what you should try to do is run through Bayes' rule in your head. Okay, so now suppose that you're trying to decide whether animals have beliefs. After someone has shown you some animal behavior, then the Bayes' rule application would look like this. The probability of animal belief given animal behavior is equal to the probability of animal behavior given animal belief times the probability of animal belief divided by the probability of animal behavior. Though you may not like it, this is what peak reasoning looks like. But for some people that might be a lot, especially if you haven't had to deal with Bayes' rule before. So what I propose we do is I'll go through each term one by one and explain what it means and show how it fits into the overall picture. Part 2.1. The normalizing constant. Let's make an easy start of it and begin with something that we can just ignore, the normalizing constant term. The reason it's called the constant is because it remains the same, whether we think about animals having beliefs or animals not having beliefs. So to see this clearer, here are two equations. The top one is about animals having beliefs given some evidence, and the bottom one is about animals not having beliefs, given some evidence. And so notice that in both the equations, the normalizing constant is the same, and this is why we don't have to care about it, because our goal, in a sense, is to decide whether the probability of the top equation is larger than the probability of the bottom equation. We can multiply both the equations by some constant, and it won't change which equation is larger. But so the main point is that for this use case, we don't have to worry about it, and so our lives are just a little bit simpler. Part 2.2. The prior. And the reason it's called the prior is that it's supposed to reflect your beliefs about animal beliefs prior to you considering any animal behavior. And so what kind of prior do we have before considering animal behavior? Well, I believe that you and I have beliefs. And furthermore, other animals are pretty similar to us by evolutionary continuity, and so it stands to reason to claim that they also probably have beliefs. In the overall equation then, the larger or stronger the prior, the larger the probability on the right, the more likely we think it is that animals have beliefs. And obviously the smaller or weaker the prior, the smaller the probability on the right. And this makes intuitive sense. The more likely I think it is that animals have beliefs to begin with, the less evidence I'll need to be convinced of that fact. But so we have a good prior here, because there's good reason to think that animals have beliefs by evolutionary continuity. And so now that we've had a careful look at our prior beliefs, we should look at the evidence. Part 2.3. The likelihood. The name of this thing can be confusing, because it again comes from parameter estimation. There you want to measure the likelihood that some set of parameters has generated your observations. So in this case, the parameter of interest is whether animals have beliefs, and we assume that they do, and then we look at the evidence and see if the evidence contradicts that assumption. And so let's take a look at the observations. There's this subreddit called Like Us, and it's got a bunch of neat videos. For example, a cow pretending to be a dragon, here's a cow conserving water, here's a super cool badger escape,
I remember one day a keeper left a rake in Stoffels' enclosure. He scratched himself, lies on his side, days thinking. Computer's working it. Take the rake, put it in his back, put it against the wall. Climb out and off you go. Stoffel!
and here's a pig solving a puzzle that I'm convinced Joe Rogan would fail.
Prima. Richtig, Moritz. Fein. Bitteschön. Fein. Bling. Und das nächste. Super. Fein. Gut gemacht! Super, super!
And don't worry, these videos aren't the argument. I just wanted to show them because I think they're neat.
I just think they're neat.
The actual argument comes from observational behavior studies. So there's obviously a problem here in that the studies that I'm about to cite are animal experiments. The later two studies seem to be okay, but the first one I don't think is even close to acceptable conditions. But I am gonna use them in order to make the case for animal belief, even though the case for animal rights would tell us to just leave those animals alone. And so it's in the name of leaving them alone that we're going to proceed. First, we're going to show learning. And the problem with a lot of animal learning studies is that they usually learn to avoid harmful stimuli, as in harmful stimuli that the experimenters inflict on the animals. In the experiment that we'll look at, the calves in question had to learn to interrupt an infrared beam. The stalls were pitch black, and the calves would only get any light if they interrupted the beam. And now we're going to skip just to the end of the experiment and the results table. The vertical axis shows the amount of light per day that the calves obtained. The horizontal axis shows time in days. It's during the period marked by the black bar at the top of the graph that the infrared sensors would create light when interrupted. We can see from the graph that the cows learned here, as they begin to interrupt the beam to get light. And then they unlearn the association here once the beam was disabled. And so we have updating beliefs both ways, as in learning and unlearning. Next, we have a simple example of decoupling in the Krasinski test. So to set up the test, simply put a cart of food on a track, and then obscure a part of the track with a tunnel. And now slowly push the cart of food along the track as cows eat from the cart. At some point, the cart will enter the tunnel, and then the cows will have to extrapolate what happens to the cart, since it's now going to be obscured from their view. The cows will of course anticipate that the cart emerges from the other side of the tunnel, because they understand how momentum works, and they have object permanence. And so this shows decoupling in cows, because they're able to maintain a belief about an object that they are not observing. Finally, we have a pretty neat study where cows showcase all the characteristics of having beliefs. The experiment setup is as follows. Cows have to choose between images of familiar cows on the one hand, and images of unfamiliar cows on the other. Depending on the setup of the experiment, either choosing familiar or unfamiliar cows yields a reward. And now we note that the cows learn this association on a training set of images. The idea here is to check whether the cow in question can take the association that it has learned on the training set and generalize it to new unseen images in the testing set. Then the whole experiment would be again repeated, except with the association reversed. As in, if in the first trial choosing familiar cows would yield a reward, now it would be choosing unfamiliar cows that would yield the reward. And again, you'd have the same training testing split and generalization. And the results of the experiment, of course, indicate that cows have beliefs. The cows were able to learn the first association, then generalize it to the testing set, then unlearn the first association and learn the reversed association, and then also generalize that to the testing set. And so here first, of course, we have learning, because they were able to learn and unlearn and relearn associations. But more importantly, we have composition. First, the cows learn whether choosing familiar or unfamiliar cows in the training set yields a reward. And then the cow observes a new image and believes that this is an image of a familiar cow. And it's by composition of those two beliefs that the cow is able to choose the correct image in the testing set. And so now we have seen decoupling, we have seen composition of beliefs, and we have seen updating your beliefs in light of new evidence. So I've only quoted 3 experiments here, but there's really no shortage of behavioral studies, and all of them are consistent with belief. The conclusion of a survey of behavioral studies of cows reads: 1. Cows are able to make sophisticated discriminations among not only objects, but humans and conspecifics. 2. Cows possess not just simple emotions, but several emotional capacities, such as cognitive judgment bias and emotional contagion. 3. Cows show an apparent emotional reaction to learning, which may reflect a sense of self-agency similar to some other mammals. 4. Cows have distinct personalities. And 5. Cows exhibit several dimensions of social complexity, including social learning. So as far as likelihood goes, I don't think we could ask for stronger evidence that aligns with animal belief, short of cows like speaking. And so it's obviously easy to generalize this argument to most animals. Part 3. How dare you? As far as I can see, you'd have to be pretty hard-pressed to try to deny animal belief, given what we have discussed. But that doesn't stop people from trying. The first attempt is by a guy called R.G. Frey, and let's say that he's the Mimi kind of philosopher. He's got a nasty habit of using the word premise instead of premises. I think he thinks that Latin makes him sound more intellectual, so he uses it all over the goddamn place. Inter alia etc. And on every page of his book, there are sentences like this. The locutions of this latter form, however, give rise to a different problem. And this is the book, by the way. I had to go to an actual physical library to get it, because scans do not exist online. I mean, just look at this. This is you versus the guy she told you not to worry about. Frey's argument is that to believe that something is true is to believe that a certain sentence is true. So for example, I believe that I'm holding a cup. And Frey would say that what is happening is that I believe that the sentence I am holding a cup is true. He's taking belief and putting it through this lens of language, as in to believe something is to have some linguistic construct in mind and to assert its truth. And then of course the next step in Frey's argument is to say that animals don't have language, and so they can't think that any sentence is true, and so they can't think that a particular sentence is true, and so they can't have beliefs. Now, if I were you, I'd be giving Frey a bit of a patronizing squint, since this is very similar to Descartes' language test. We actually have a picture of Frey coming up with this argument. Like, Frey, my dude, if you're gonna plagiarize someone, find someone better than René. I don't think you need a brain to think Descartes. There's a lot of ways to show that Frey's reasoning is wrong, but the quickest one is by contradiction. The idea is that humans are born with their tabulus racid. They are blank slates. They do not believe that any sentence is true at birth, because they have no language at birth. And so now, if we go by Frey's reasoning, that kid will never be able to start learning, because they won't have any frame of reference. Like, suppose the kid's parent picks up an apple and points to it and says, apple, apple, apple. To the kid, this will signify precisely zilch, because the kid's got no idea what pointing might mean, what repeated sounds might mean, or whatever. No starting sentences means no beliefs, means no context, means no way to start interpreting anything, means no learning. Up in that kid's head is nothing but dead, empty space. A feeling which I imagine Frey is intimately familiar with. And so that's the first argument against animal belief. and we didn't even bring up people that might not have the use of language due to developmental difficulties. It's just a line of reasoning that is so weak that it almost feels bad faith. And I do want to mention that there's lots of stuff like that in here. Like, the first chapter of this book is Frey just pretending to be confused as to why we even need rights. Part 3.1. Beliefs about beliefs. To talk about the second challenge to animal belief, we'll need to lay some groundwork. First, notice that beliefs are recursive in nature. This means that beliefs depend on other related beliefs, and those related beliefs in turn also depend on other beliefs, and so on. Any particular belief is really defined by the belief network. So for example, you might believe that there's a cat up a tree. But for that belief to be coherent, you also need beliefs about what a tree is, and about what a cat is, and about the physical properties of those two. And then those beliefs will entail further beliefs, and so on, and so on. So with that in mind, let's look at the first way to compare beliefs. All or nothing. All or nothing is a binary similarity metric. Two beliefs are either identical or they are different. Two beliefs are the same if all of the related beliefs are the same. And otherwise, they are nothing alike. Hence the name all or nothing. There's lots of examples of all or nothing reasoning out in the wild. But the one we're gonna go with is top lock versus bottom lock drama. Among the fans of BBC's version of Sherlock, there's a group of people that think that Sherlock is gay for Watson, and that Sherlock is the top in the arrangement. That theory is called top lock. And then of course, there's another group of people that also think Sherlock is gay for Watson, but crucially, also think that Sherlock is the bottom in the arrangement. And that's of course called bottom lock. Now those of us less refined might say that whether a top or a bottom, Sherlock Holmes is Sherlock Holmes. But a top locker would tell you that the idea of Sherlock being a doughy, softy bottom is clearly contrary to the dark fuck prince persona that Sherlock has. And a bottom locker would tell you that the idea of top lock is creepy and predatory. And that what really needs to happen is that the rift deep inside Sherlock needs to be soothed by the healing balm of Watson's high fructose corn syrup. It's getting hot in here. And so that's all or nothing. One difference in the tree structure and the two beliefs are incomparable. Then, in contrast to all or nothing, we have the more or less perspective. More or less is exactly what it sounds like. Two beliefs can be more or less similar depending on the amount of related beliefs they share. So whether a top or a bottom, Sherlock Holmes is more or less Sherlock Holmes. And it doesn't seem very controversial to say that the more or less perspective is the preferred way to compare beliefs. For one, I think it is how we compare beliefs in our everyday lives. If you asked Frey, he would say that this is the modus operandi. And for two, under all or nothing, two beliefs can't become more similar. So for example, if I believe that Sherlock is from England, and you believe that Sherlock is from Mars, our beliefs won't become any more similar if you change your belief to say that Sherlock is from Boston, which is weird and not how beliefs work. Part 3.2. Stephen Stich is more or less wrong. Stich's position is more subtle, and he ends his paper with this sentence. Do animals have beliefs? To paraphrase my young son, a little bit they do, and a little bit they don't. Stich's argument is that no matter how hard you and I might try, we won't be able to precisely specify what an animal believes. So suppose that a dog sees a cat running up into a tree. Then we might say that that dog believes there's a cat up in that tree. But then how does the dog conceptualize a tree? And how does the dog conceptualize a cat? The dog's understanding of a tree is unlikely to include photosynthesis, or the fact that trees come from seeds. To talk about what the dog believes about a tree, we'll need to talk about the dog belief network, and we just have no good way of saying what is in such a network. And then Stich would say that since we can't talk about the network, we can't talk about any particular node in the network, and so we can't talk about any particular belief. But there is a mistake in Stich's reasoning. We do know some animal beliefs with high probability. We know the really simple ones. For example, we can clearly see that dogs treat bones as food or a treat. They gnaw the bones, they chew them, they lick them, they seem to be just enjoying themselves. And so notice then that that is precisely what a bone is to a lot of people, a food item. They'll get a bone, take it home, put it in a broth, add a potato.
Baby, you got a stew going.
And so when it comes to extremely simple beliefs, such as threats, or food, or elementary natural physics, we do know that animals have the same beliefs as we do, more or less. So in that cat and dog example, we do know that the dog believes that there's an alive animal up in that tree, and that the dog has some basic beliefs about a tree, like that the dog can't go through the tree. Like, sure, the dog doesn't know anything about the electron exclusion principle, but that doesn't matter. The important thing to understand for the dog is that they can't just phase through the tree. The dog has the simple beliefs. By evolutionary continuity and behavioral studies, we can claim that our belief network and the dog belief network has overlap in the very simple section. To say it another way, I'm sure there are complex dog concepts that we'll never be able to grasp, like something super subtle about smell, you know? But the simple beliefs, the simple ones we can get. Part 4. It's Bayesian all the way down. As a fun exercise, let's suppose that you saw a YouTube video claiming that animals have beliefs, and now you want to think about it for yourself. Knowing what you now know, you could quickly run through Bayes' rule in your head, and you would arrive at this equation. The probability of animal belief given this video is equal to the probability of this video given animal belief times the probability of animal belief divided by the probability of the video. We can again ignore the normalizing constant by the same reasoning as before. So now for your prior on animal belief. I'm going to go ahead and guess that you were already probably in the animals have beliefs camp. Because like, who isn't? And now what about the evidence? Well, I do think that the evidence is pretty bulletproof. We looked at biological plausibility and evolutionary continuity. We looked at how our minds work according to the folk psychology theory of mind and saw that there are close parallels in animals. We saw behavioral studies, and we saw that arguments against animal belief don't hold much in the way of water. And putting all of that together, I think we can claim that animals have beliefs and desires. And I think it's a nice thought that all of us animals on planet Earth are in this together. We're sort of like the big siblings to the other species. And the bad news is that we're very bad big siblings. Part 5. For you, my heart of hearts. As cults go, I think this one's shaping up to be scarily well reasoned. Logic, empathy, reason. It's how those liberals get you. You gotta watch out for that. Otherwise, next thing you know, you'll be judging people's shopping carts and ruining their dinners. Which brings us on to the fact that animal rights has a bad reputation. When people think of veganism, they usually think of giving stuff up. As in, here's yet another thing that I now have to do, or I'm an asshole, as if though I was short on stuff to do before. And here's the smug and emaciated looking vegan community that are gonna judge me and call me an asshole unless I do what they tell me to do. But it only looks that way from the outside looking in. When you actually get into it and start to understand animal rights and maybe start to confide in some friends, that you're starting to think that killing billions of animals every year so that we can have hot dogs is maybe not the peak of rationality, it feels good. It feels good to advocate for being kinder. It feels good to try to make a dent in something so objectively horrible. The reason I bring this up is that I hope that, since you're still watching, that you feel good about seeing this, and that you feel good about learning about arguments for animal rights, and getting a deep understanding for why veganism exists. I hope that the next time there's a conversation about animals, that these arguments are useful to you. And I hope that you don't see this as a drag or a constraint, but as an opportunity to be a part of something that is objectively good. You're a far more integral part of the world than you think, and you can change the future far more than you expect. See you in the next one.